where they were dismissing provisions in the American Rescue Plan and the Jobs Act and the Families Act as radical socialism. Radical socialism. That's what one of my colleagues said repeatedly on the other side of the aisle. What does that radical socialism look like? The opportunity to extend 2 years of education to the youngest children in America to get them started in kindergarten and the first grade. We know that pays off. They end up graduating from high school, college, and beyond, just getting a good start. How about 2 more years after the 12th grade so that they can go to community colleges at no cost and develop their skills and training? Is that another radical socialist idea? And they want to get people back to work, and so do we. You want to get women back to work? Ask women why they're not going back to work. First, the jobs aren't paying nearly enough to support their families. Secondly, they're worried about their kids. They're afraid what's going to happen to them in the schools when they return there, if the schools are open. And if the schools aren't open and they don't have daycare available, those mothers are staying home for obvious reasons, for the sake of the children. Radical socialist ideas. And then when you look at the amount of money that the Republicans are willing to spend to move America into the 21st century, investments in training and education, investments in basics like broadband, expanding our electrical grid, the Republicans want to lowball it. They don't want to spend too much money. They don't want to have us come forward at this moment in history of opportunity. The Republican Party of the United States of America has a solid second-place finish strategy for America. That's not what Joe Biden believes. It's not what we believe. We believe this country can succeed if we invest in the people and believe in the people and give businesses an incentive to create jobs and opportunities. And that's what we're there for. The last point I want to make is this. On the Voting Act, the debate's on today. Ted Cruz has only 47 amendments, I understand, and I'm sure they're going to finish it by the end of the day and report a bill to us. But imagine, if you will, that we had the largest turnout in history in a presidential election. Imagine, if you will, that even Republicans were swatting down Donald Trump's big lie because they believe that what we have in the results are accurate and honest across the United States. And then some 20 state legislators controlled by Republicans decide that the answer to that scenario is to reduce the opportunity to vote in the next election. And to be specific about it, reduce the opportunity particularly for those people of color and lower income individuals who will be troubled by the requirement to show up at limited periods of time to vote. If we want America to be a strong democracy, we need more and more people voting. We stand for that premise, the Republicans the opposite.
Senator Murray.
Thank you so much, and thank you to Senator Durbin for defining how we make our economy work in this country with the investments that he talked about. Radical socialism, to make sure that you can go to work and your children are safe, that they get a good education, that they can go on and get a college degree. That's called making America work. So thank you for those comments. As we are fighting to make sure that our workers and our families and small businesses rebuild better after this pandemic. That is what we are talking about here as Democrats in the Senate, working with the administration. And we've really got to shore up the foundations. And a big part of that, as well as what we just talked about, is making sure our democracy works for every single American voter. Our democracy depends on people's participation. The essence of that is having every American use their voice. How do they do that? By voting. But what we are seeing right now is in Republican-led legislatures across the country is a coordinated effort to make it harder for Black, Latino, young, and lower-income Americans to make their voices heard at the ballot box. No elected official should be willing to watch that happen, regardless of party. So to the same Republican leaders who have said, let the people decide, so many times on issues as important as accountability for foreign interference in our elections or a lifetime appointment to the Supreme Court, now you can show you can mean it by working with us to take power away from special interests and billionaires and put it back in the hands of American voters where it belongs. As Leader Schumer has said, the For the People Act is S1 because it is our top priority. And Democrats are going to fight with everything we've got to get it done and safeguard every voter's fundamental right to be heard, to use their voice in this democracy. Thank you.
Thank you,
Senator
Senator
Stabenow.
Murray and Senator Stabenow.
Well, thank you. It's always wonderful to be here with my colleagues. And let me just say that the people of Michigan and across our country need the For the People Act. They need it to protect their freedom to vote, and they need it to make sure their voices are heard. The people in our country need the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan to make sure that they can get ahead and that they can make life better for themselves and their family. That's what these things are all about. Right now in Michigan, Republicans in the legislature are trying to push through a package of bills that would make it much more difficult to vote. And some analysts have actually said it even goes farther than Georgia, believe it or not. Why are they doing this? Because last November, in the middle of a pandemic, more people in Michigan voted than ever before. The Republicans just don't like who they voted for. 5.5 million people in Michigan voted. Michigan counties verified the vote. Our state verified the vote. And we should be celebrating this right now. But because Republicans didn't like the results, they are coming after Michigan voters and voters across the country. That's why we have to pass the For the People Act. The For the People Act will protect our freedom to vote as Americans. And the American Jobs Plan and the American Families Plan is going to help people get ahead. The Jobs Plan alone, I have to tell you from a Michigan perspective, it's very exciting because I see Michigan written on every page of this in terms of rebuilding our state and the middle class. But this is about making things in America. It's about investing in our own manufacturing, rebuilding and bringing back our own supply chains so we're not dependent on other countries, getting electric vehicles on the road, creating good-paying jobs, rebuilding our infrastructure, and putting the U.S. on a path to compete successfully with China for the clean energy future. And there's no question that we can do that if we are focused. I love the fact that President Biden has called this a blue-collar blueprint for America. And it's just what we need to rebuild our middle class. So let's protect people's freedom to vote, and let's unleash the power of our people to build a future that's made in America.
Thank you, Deb. And now we're ready for questions. Yes.
Senator Schumer, in response to the violence in Israel, recently, Senator Warren says the Biden administration should make it clear to the Israeli government that the evictions of Palestinian families from East Jerusalem is illegal and must stop immediately. Do you have any view on the subject? And secondly, what's the timeline for getting a back circuit for Israel through the Senate?
Well, the second I'll have to get back to you on. I don't have the timeline. On the first, I hope both sides can come together and bring peace. Yes. Look, I think the 80% of Americans believe the system ought to be made more progressive and the wealthy ought to pay a much fairer share. The fact that there are so many large corporations and very wealthy individuals who don't pay any taxes at all, we have to do a lot. And we want this overwhelming support in our caucus for a tax system that is far more progressive. Yes, nope. You know, when you study it, there are many reasons that there is a shortage of workers. Some of it is because Trump cut off immigration so severely. We have half the number of immigrants that came in. Some of it is because people need childcare, as Patty and Dick talked about, and don't have childcare. Some of it is because people don't want to go back until they're sure that COVID is beaten. So there are a whole lot of reasons for this, and I think many more people are helped. All the people who can't get jobs for the variety of reasons we've talked about, many more people are helped by this $300 extra, and the overwhelming support in our caucus is to keep it. Yes.
When you talk about the infrastructure bill, going back to diesel, some of these pieces of legislation, you have such a narrow report. Isn't the problem not so much the filibuster, but
Look, we have discussions in our caucus all the time. Our leadership team is broad. It goes from Bernie Sanders to Joe Manchin, and we discuss things all the time. And in the past, we've been able to come together on every major issue, and I'm very hopeful that'll happen again. Yes, next.
When would you put in cut off negotiations with
Look, as we said, we prefer to do things in a bipartisan way, and we're going to keep pursuing that in a variety of different ways. And even when it can't be bipartisan, we're going to have a process in committees where they can do amendments and stuff like that. But obviously, we don't want to make the mistake of 2009 and 10, where the negotiations went on forever. Then the Republicans didn't join, and we couldn't get much else done. Yes, last one. You know, I think it's an absolute disgrace that the Republicans are using the debt ceiling, which deals with the financial security, as sort of a political issue. We should get something done in the right way. Thank you, everybody. Okay, 2 more. Go ahead.
President Biden says, President Biden said he wanted to see a policing bill on his by May 24th. Is that feasible? Will you commit to putting a bill on the floor? And I also
No.
want to ask about Congressman Clyburn, who said he'd be doing
Well, I'm not going to comment on Clyburn. I'm going to say Cory Booker is leading the negotiations for our side. He's working with Karen Bass of the Black Caucus. He's working with Senator Durbin, our chair of Judiciary, and they're making good progress.
Is it a bad sign?
I'm not gonna try to publicly negotiate. I have a lot of faith in Cory Booker. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, folks.
The prospects for bipartisanship in Washington?
Well, Peter, as probably won't surprise you, we're not spending much time here determining an outcome of, or predicting an outcome of, I should say, or analyzing the impact of inter-party fighting within the Republican Party. We will leave that to them to work out among themselves.
But will it or will it not affect you guys are fighting for bipartisanship, so will her likely new position help or hurt that effort?
At no point is our effort to fight for bipartisanship about being an arbiter or a mediator between inter-party fighting in the Republican Party. You know, the president has invited tomorrow, same day as the vote, he's invited bipartisan leaders to come to the White House to have a discussion about where we can find common ground and how we can work together. And that's an example of how he feels he can represent the American people, pursue an agenda that would help benefit people, whether they voted for him or not. So we'll let the inter-party squabbling happen at the table over here, and at the table over here, or a smaller table in the Oval Office, we're gonna have a discussion about how we can work together. Go ahead.
Thank you. 2 topics, I'll go quick. Is the White House rethinking their opposition to new pipeline projects since one really important one goes offline and gas stations start running dry?
I wouldn't say we look at it through that prism, Peter. We look at it, we analyze both the impact, the economic impact, as well as the environmental impact. And that will certainly remain the case, but we look at each pipeline project individually.
You mentioned the environmental impact. If the solution for this pipeline going offline is for oil producers to start using rail cars and oil tankers as floating storage, and for the EPA to start letting gas stations sell lower quality fuel that is not as clean burning. How is the president showing U.S. climate leadership?
Well, Peter, I think what the president's trying to do in this moment in time is ensure that the American people know that we're going to work to address this current challenge, and that he is going to use all of the assets and resources at his disposal in departments. And you saw that as evidence from what our Secretary of Homeland Security talked about, what our Secretary of Energy talked about to address these current challenges. And he doesn't want people on the East Coast and the Southeast to worry. He doesn't want them he wants them to have an understanding of the fact that the government is all over this, and we're working to address it and address their needs as quickly as possible.
And quickly on the pandemic, is the CDC making it harder for you guys to convince people to get vaccines and to wear masks when they've created this impression that up to 10% of COVID transmission occurs outdoors, even though there's this New York Times report now where they say there's not a single documented COVID infection anywhere in the world from casual outdoor interactions?
Well, I believe Dr. Walensky addressed this in the Senate hearing this morning, and she pointed to a collection of scientific studies that set that number, that they relied on, that set that number at less than 10%. We know as more people get vaccinated, there will be less and less need for certain restrictions. And the CDC has said they will continue to evaluate the science and update their recommendations, as they have already begun doing. And so that's what we will be relying on moving forward, and as we have been.
But they took the study, they chose to put it as part of their guidance. And so I guess my last question would be, the then president-elect said in January, I've always said that the Biden-Harris administration will lead with science and truth. Which one is it here?
Well, again, Peter, we know that outdoor transmission is rare. The CDC has said that themselves. I would certainly refer you to them on their, and the scientists and experts there, the scientists, the leaders in data analysis, to get to the heart of what they look at. But Dr. Walensky referred to several studies that provided that data and that information, and that's what they look at there. Go ahead, Mary.
Thanks, Shannon. On the pipeline, the president has talked about needing to give financial support to protect critical infrastructure, but his infrastructure plan doesn't explicitly outline any funding for cybersecurity. So what kind of investments, if any, in cybersecurity would the president like to see included in an infrastructure bill to prevent future attacks like this?
Well, as we work and have discussions with Congress, and as we finalize details of the American Jobs Plan, we are talking about investing in critical infrastructure. And we've looked at, for example, what we saw in Texas, and the need to better protect and better prepare for even events like that, weather events, where infrastructure could have been better protected. And certainly ensuring that cybersecurity is a part of that conversation is on the mind of the president, and one he'll look forward to his team having with members and with staff on the Hill moving forward.
I guess when you take a big picture look at this, cybersecurity experts have been warning for years about attacks like this, and yet we haven't seen the government take steps to be able to prevent them. Why should Americans be confident that this time will be any different?
Well, I think it's important to remember this is a private sector company. This isn't a federal government entity, and we are working closely with them both to stay closely coordinated, ensure that they are getting the assistance and counsel they need, but also we are working through an interagency process with a great deal of urgency, I promise you, coming from the president, to ensure that we are taking steps through steps from the federal government to plan for all contingencies. This was a private sector action, as Secretary Granholm said, of a company to take down their pipeline because of the ransomware. This is ransomware that has been out there for some time. We have in this White House and in this government, we have ensured that there is increased cooperation between the public and private sector. But a big lesson from this is the need for all companies to harden their cybersecurity apparatus and to ensure that they are protecting themselves, even as we are working as a government to plan for contingencies and ensure that across the federal government, we have all the necessary protections in place.
And just lastly, the president said yesterday that the hack was traced back to Russia, but there was no evidence that the Russian government was involved. Is that still your understanding? And if so, what responsibility does Russia bear, if any, to deal with these actors?
Well, the president also said that his intelligence community has not made a full assessment yet, which remains the case. But also that given that this entity that the FBI had concluded, or attributed, I should say, with the attack, was located in Russia, that that country has a responsibility to act responsibly. But again, we'll wait for our intelligence community to make a full assessment before we have more to convey about it. Go ahead, Nancy.
We are expecting new inflation numbers out tomorrow, and I'm wondering if the gas price surge and the continuous commodity surge, like lumber, is changing the administration's outlook at all on inflation.
Well, let me first say that, of course, the Federal Reserve, I would point you to them to speak to or provide analysis or speculation on anything as it relates to inflation or the impact of certain external actions. I will say, as we've said in here before, but we'll reiterate that, of course, we take the possibility of inflation quite seriously, as actions that have been taken to date, or proposals that have been made. Most economic analysts believe that it will have a temporary or transitory impact, but in terms of analysis on current events, I would point you to the Federal Reserve. Go ahead.
Yes, Jen, the president assured governors today there'll be enough vaccine for all Americans. What about Americans overseas? There's a bipartisan groups who are pleading with this administration to help them get vaccinated. It's impractical for them to fly back to the United States. So are you looking into this? Anything that the administration can do?
Well, we certainly do, and as a veteran of the State Department, I can restate that we are quite focused on the health, safety, well-being of Americans living all around the world. We have not historically provided private health care for Americans living overseas, so that remains our policy, but I don't have anything to predict in terms of what may be ahead.
Just one quick housekeeping item for us in the room here.
Yeah.
Why was the pool not invited in to the president's remarks today? What was different about today than any other day for the pool?
Well, the entirety of the remarks were live streamed for everyone in the media, whether they're sitting here or sitting at home or sitting in a bureau, could see, or the American people could see, including the engagements with governors, questions and answers with governors. So I don't know that you can be more transparent than that.
Is this going to be the norm now, or was this a one-off?
I think this was a setup where you had multiple governors on a stage, and it was just something where ensuring it was live streamed, available to everybody, was the choice that we made. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. If Congress can't get together on a bipartisan January 6th commission, is the president willing to appoint one on his own?
Well, I know they're still working through this, and there is strong support among many members of Congress in a commission, which obviously is something we also support from this administration. So I'm not going to stand here and predict failure or get ahead of that process that's ongoing.
Well, relatedly, and then this goes to the Liz Cheney, Lee Stefanik thing.
Sure.
Is the president concerned that there are so many Republicans who are still going along with the lie that the election was rigged or illegitimate somehow?
Well, we're focused on what we can entirely control from here. And what the president's focus is on is leading by example, is governing for all Americans, and is hopefully reinstilling trust in not just government and the federal government, but also in democracy. We don't expect that to happen overnight, but that is a central objective of his presidency. And that's how he and we feel we can best combat the misinformation that continues to be out there. Go ahead, Anita.
A couple questions about the meetings this week with Republicans
Sure.
or members of both parties. Can you kind of give us a sense when they come back to the Capitol, they tell us sort of what some of those issues are that they're discussing. What is your perspective on, is the number one issue the size of the package at this point? Is it how to pay for it, or is it specific proposals that are in it?
You mean in terms of disagreement between?
That need to be worked out, issues that need to be resolved.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that most people, not only in the country, but also even in elected office, believe that our infrastructure is outdated, believe that we need to create jobs, believe that we need to compete with China. Those are all areas where, frankly, Democrats and Republicans have worked
Hello and welcome to the Nomiki Show. It is Tuesday. I am Nomiki Konst, and I am amazed yet again at the capacity of Republicans, neoliberals, and corporate media to twist what it means to be a working person in this country as if it needs twisting. How do we not know what a working person is? Today's example is their phony narrative that enhanced unemployment insurance is creating a labor shortage. Oh my God. Low-wage workers were the victims of this pandemic, and now we are going to blame the victims because they are cautious about coming back to work, or because they can't come back to work because they have no one to look after their kids, or because they don't trust their bosses to keep them and their workplace safe from COVID. Even by the usual callous standards of American employers and their pals, this is beyond heartless. It is blindness that makes it hard to address the real issues, which of course is their purpose. This is the new version of that old trope that government safety nets coddle people and destroy their narrative, which is why our safety nets in America are so much less adequate than in almost any other developed country. Mitch McConnell actually said, as if it were a fact, that Kentuckians and Americans were staying home from work because it was, quote, more lucrative. Lucrative. I can't stop saying that word, lucrative. Mitch McConnell really said that, lucrative. Let's break it down. Unemployment benefits, including the enhanced benefit from the federal government, come to the equivalent about $15 an hour for a 40-hour a week job. In other words, they're about in the place where the minimum wage would have been if it were set, if Mitch McConnell's Senate had not forced Joe Biden to pull the minimum wage increase out of the stimulus bill, and also Joe Manchin and Kirsten Sinema. All right, so let's show this tweet from former Representative Katie Hill. Okay, Katie Hill says, a month ago, we can't raise the minimum wage or businesses can't function. Today, businesses, there we go. This is how it works. Today, businesses can't function because people won't work for shit wages. Senator McConnell calling $15 an hour lucrative is just cruel. Now, it is true that in some parts of the country where the minimum wage is below $15 an hour, there are some workers who can take home more from unemployment benefits than from their low-wage job. And they aren't actually allowed to turn down that job. And there is very little evidence that this is the reason employers are having trouble finding workers. But if it is a cause, there is a simple and obvious fix, a market fix, I might add. Raise the wages. Raise the legal minimum wage. Create a livable base wage for all Americans. This is a consumer-based economy. Guess what? They'll come back to work. The fact that wages are not going up reveals the lie that is about lucrative unemployment benefits. There are so many valid and easy to grasp reasons why low-wage workers are not rushing back. Fear is a big one, as the Biden administration said. Fear that the pandemic isn't over, that workplaces are not safe, that bosses can't be counted on to protect workers from their unsafe doings. Then there is childcare. And this is huge. If schools are not back in person and there are no inexpensive childcare facilities or free, dare I add, childcare facilities, parents have no choice but to stay home. And one more thing. For one very brief moment, America actually put enough money back into the pockets of low-wage workers to help them get by. But of course, that moment isn't going to last. It was brief. It was a moment. Not long enough. So Mitch McConnell and the employers can, just relax. The enhanced unemployment insurance runs out in September anyways. Personally, I would like to keep going forever. But maybe it would be easier for us all to agree that between now and September, we're going to fix the things that are really keeping workers from going to work. Low wages, a lack of childcare, unsafe working conditions, including the fear of pandemic disease. Then employers can staff up. And workers can make a livable wage. Simple as that. Take care of the humans that live in this country, that provide the labor that you rely on. Automate that. All right, we have a wonderful show today. We have Akela Lacy and Joshua Kahn Russell to talk about what is going on in the Mideast right now. Hard to ignore it. But also last week and ongoing, there is a major scuffle, let's just say, in Colombia, the country of Colombia. And Andrés Bernal is on to discuss that and maybe a little bit about the New York City mayor's race. We will be right back after this break with Andrés Bernal. Welcome back to the Nomiki Show, straight out of Queens. Andrés Bernal is a lecturer of urban studies at CUNY Queens College. He's a research fellow with the Global Institute of Sustainable Prosperity and a senior policy advisor currently with the Diane Morales campaign for New York City mayor. Quite a time to be in New York City politics. We'll get to, I want to touch on that a little bit at the end, but Andrés, welcome to the show. So great to have you.
So happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So I'm really excited to have this conversation. Quite a day to talk about escalations globally. Almost too much to wrap our heads around, but I don't want to forget that there is a crisis in Colombia right now, and you, of course, are very familiar with it. So let's start from, not from the beginning, but let's start from. You never want to start at the beginning because it's like a 7-hour show. It's a documentary. I'm doing that right now in Puerto Rico. I'm like, people are like, what's going on in Puerto Rico? I'm like, I don't know, God. I'm like, I don't know. I had thousands of hours of footage and I'm trying to put it in an hour and a half. Trust me, it's not easy.
1492, there's a trip that happens.
So let's start with the 90s. How's that? What got us to this situation in which a Black Hawk helicopter was firing down at people and murdering them blatantly, overtly in 2021 when we thought we got over those tactics? I guess not everybody's gotten that memo.
Yeah, no, it's really important to kind of see how modern politics in Colombia has certain origins through the 90s and then into the early 2000s, and in a lot of ways it mirrors the evolution of American politics as well. So, in the 90s, we kind of see this escalation of the war on drugs, Plan Colombia, which invests billions of dollars into fighting the war on drugs, escalating the war on drugs, using these spraying techniques on many crops and ecosystems in Colombia that do a lot of damage to environmental issues, and the kind of militarization of the country increases even more. And what ends up happening is the country was feeling pretty desperate after some failed attempts to arrive at peace agreements. There's such a long history of conflict over the land and land distribution in Colombia that hasn't been settled. But what happens is that in the early 2000s, in 2002 precisely, right after 9/11, you see the war on terror escalating. And so in Colombia, this guy by the name of Álvaro Uribe gets elected into the presidency. And he had been a senator for a while, and he had helped pass certain legislations that were trying to privatize, in a lot of ways, effectively privatized healthcare in Colombia, Social Security, many of these things after the American models of kind of doing the way we do a lot of things here, and after the way that Republicans in particular do things here. And he won that presidency very much on the narrative of the war on terror and how you needed law and order, very much echoing Bush administration talking points. We were about to go into the war in Iraq. And so he's able to like organize this fervor behind him that, people really believe that finally Colombia was going to reach peace, because basically he said we were going to go out and kill everybody that was, with the FARC or sympathizing with the FARC or against the state. They were going to fight the FARC and they were going to defeat them. So
just for folks, who is the FARC?
Yeah, the FARC is the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia. They're no longer an official group, but they were kind of like a Stalinist group that was fighting this armed revolution, very Cold War Orthodox Marxist style. They never really had popular support from the country. And when they started to grow, for a while, they were the biggest guerrilla force in the world. They got involved in a lot of the drug trade as well, and in kidnapping. And when they started to do the kidnappings, that's when they lost a lot of public support as well, right? So
when you explain that, sorry to interrupt for a second, but okay, so they got involved in a little bit of, I know this is it's much more complicated, but they got involved in the drug trade as well and the kidnappings. But wasn't like the U.S. government also supporting the drug trade? So how does that kind of interact?
I mean, I think the situation is that the system around this conflict has bad players on all sides, has terrible players on all sides. And I think what's important to note is it's the people, the rural people, the farm workers of Colombia that are suffering the most, that are suffering in between this really, incredibly violent conflict. And so you have the FARC doing some pretty terrible things, but these paramilitary groups start to form. And they escalate the violence to levels that are like at genocidal type of levels, right? They become known to go into villages, and if they find anybody that may have sympathized or maybe had progressive values, or even were just labor organizers or environmental organizers, right? And they commit these massacres. So that's really kind of what's happening there.
When you say massacres, what years are we talking about? And like, I hate to use numbers, but we've done a lot of massacre stories on the show in the global South and in Indonesia. And like, what are we talking about here? And in what years?
Well, yeah, so this is happening all through. The thing is, I mean, it's hard to pin down years because this is going on since like the 60s, the 40s, the 60s. My dad and I often kind of have this, this line that Colombia's kind of been in a war ever since we won our independence. And it's been a nonstop battle between liberals and conservatives over control of the land, control of the country. But through the 90s, this paramilitary problem becomes pretty serious. And I mean, to get to a number that I think is really important, Álvaro Uribe, while he's president, Bush gives him the Medal of Freedom, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
Bush Jr.,
yeah. And this is like in 2009. And all of a sudden, slowly, because of progressives in the Senate and other members of Colombia, people start to hear about these scandals that are happening. And one of these scandals in Colombia, we call it the falsos positivos, or false positives, was that under Uribe's watch, the military was being pressured to get kills no matter what, right? They had to get numbers. They had to get quotas of kills of FARC members. So what they would end up doing is go into villages, fine poor people, fine people with disabilities, right? That's also very known. Dress them up as FARC members, murder them, and then present them as victories and as kills. And there was a number like 3,000 of these killings. And the numbers are higher because some of these numbers, these are like official numbers, but there's a lot of killings that are never counted as official as well. So that's this incredibly brutal thing that goes on over there, and it happens over Uribe's watch. People in his party start getting convicted and accused of paramilitary deals and associations. So what people start finding out in the human rights community is that Uribe is integrating paramilitarism into the Colombian state. And there's all these corruption scandals that happen, people getting bought out. Interestingly enough, in 1991, the FBI marks Uribe as one of the most important narco traffickers in Colombia, and associated with Pablo Escobar. And so, but like,
as a leader, let's just reinforce this is somebody.
Yeah, as a figure. And again, like last week, Uribe was invited to speak at NYU, right? Like he does the tours all the time of Harvard and Yale and NYU and Princeton, and he's brought in to speak, and people always protest and stuff like that. But I think the international community has kind of dropped the ball on what happens in Colombia and not really cared. And it's kind of exciting now to see people finally start to pay attention to what's been going on. So this scandal is quite, a serious thing. He gets in trouble for obstruction of justice later on. He was actually under house arrest until recently. So it's this huge thing. He tries to change the Constitution to run a third term, and a Supreme Court justice overturns that. He later tries to get rid of that Supreme Court. So it's this mess that starts going on.
This is like classic, like textbook classic, dictator-esque behavior. And yet NYU and Princeton, you think they would have learned from Assad when they profiled him in Vogue? They think,
right?
That's what's so frustrating about this. Like the writing, it's not that the writing's on the wall; it's in your face.
It's in your face if you want to hear, if you want to look for it. And what I think what's important to note is that this represents a kind of authoritarianism and a kind of state violence that's also neoliberal and very pro-business. So a lot of the West is fine with it. If we can get this is where there's some complicity, because there have been many scandals of everybody from Chiquita Banana to Coca-Cola to other companies they set up shop in Colombia, and when people want to organize to get better labor deals or want to say hey, maybe we shouldn't be mining on this mountain because you're going to destroy it or you're going to screw up our river, they will hire mercenaries or paramilitaries.
So when you say mercenaries, do you mean Colombians? Do you mean that there's like special forces, privatized, Blackwater-esque kind of people, or is this
in Colombia?
In Colombia, okay.
Paramilitaries and other kinds of forces of that sort. There's a lot of controversy with institutions like the former School of the Americas here in the United States that train some of these people. So again, even the Democrats, it shouldn't be a surprise, I suppose, but a lot of the mainstream Democrats kind of are mostly okay with it. Sometimes they're hey, you've gone too far, watch out. But really there's never been any serious accountability from the international community to what's been happening with all of this. So needless to say, all of these scandals are going on. And then when he can't run for his third term, he kind of chooses his defense minister, Santos, to run on his party. Santos wins, and then Santos betrays him and goes in a more moderate direction. And because Santos comes from
I
think Santos comes from a kind of a liberal oligarchy kind of family. And a lot, I think he envisioned that if the country kept going in that direction, it was going to implode. It's just not sustainable.
Was he of a younger generation? Was there
No, he wasn't younger, but I think he was being politically expedient, and he saw an opportunity to broker a peace deal with the FARC, and that's what he went for it. And in 2016, first they did a referendum on the peace deals, and Uribe and his whole machinery flips out, and they launch this propaganda campaign against the peace agreements. And you would hear everything from kind of right-wing evangelical churches and that kind of like religious fundamentalism saying that brokering peace with the FARC and brokering peace with guerrilla groups was the gender politics and the gay agenda. So you'd hear that happening, right? The trans agenda. So it's like you have the kind of the beginning of this paranoid right-wing talking point starts to echo Trumpism in our country at this point. And the referendum actually fails by 1%. So, again, I think like the role of propaganda, media, rhetoric, narratives, the way that kind of like constructs political possibilities for people plays a huge role in this. So the referendum lost by 1%, but Santos keeps going and he brokers the peace deal that same year. And so the next elections that come up in 2018, the right, the Colombian right, Uribe chooses his protege in Duque, who's now the president, and they kind of like organize around, we're going to destroy these peace deals, we're going to like, hold people accountable, hold the terrorists accountable.
Just to make this clear, he betrays Santos. He decides to go against him.
Right. So Uribe kind of starts a new party and he's like, Santos betrayed me. How he destroyed the country. He betrayed the nation. How dare he do that? And that's his whole narrative. So they start a new party to kind of win back power. Uribe is kind of this central character in Colombian politics, representing the right wing that I would argue is kind of like the legacy of Pinochet, if you really think about it. And a lot of people, upper middle class people, Colombians, wealthier Colombians in the United States, they get to enjoy the privileges of the violence that was being faced by people in the countryside and social leaders and dissidents and this sort of thing. So, if you're a wealthier person, you go to Colombia, you can rent out a farm, huge acres of land, you can have a great time, it's all fun and games, right? And I've kind of lived some of this in some of the privileged spaces I've been in as well. But it's really easy to kind of just turn the blind eye to all the human rights crises that are happening, and it's totally unacceptable. So that's kind of what's been going on until now. And so, yes.
Can I? Sorry, just to intervene for a little bit. So let's put this geopolitical. I mean, I hate to be so basic about this, but let's just put this in context for our American audience or larger U.S. audience. Most Americans associate Colombia with the drug trade, with the cartels, with narcos, if you want to like play that game. There's kind of a school of thought that the drug flow, the what's the right way? I'm trying to think of the word for it. The supply chain, right, was cut off. And that essentially affected, because of the drug laws, specifically the targeting of distribution in New York City. There's a very complicated like theory that it affected the drug cartels in Colombia. Do you see it that way? Do people feel like when Rudy Giuliani targeted every major gang in New York, that was really a part of, because they were part, that's how the drug industry works. But I say this not to get into like the weeds of the drug industry, but really to kind of understand that was the power center. And then when power breaks down and Escobar and others, it's weaker, vacuums are created and political instability is created. So has like Colombia dealt with the instability that has ensued since the drug trade has weakened in Colombia?
Well,
does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's trying to, but part of this paramilitarization of the state is one thing that's filling that vacuum. The rise of the Mexican cartels is, and the entry of the Mexican cartels into Colombia. I think right now you're seeing that happen. Like they're taking over Colombia in a lot of ways.
What do you mean by that? Can you explain?
Well, like, El Chapo and the cartel of Sinaloa and all, they're in various parts of Colombia making deals and controlling those distribution centers right now. And But I think what's important beyond all of this is that a lot of farmers and peasants in Colombia don't have anything any other alternative option to produce things to make a living than to participate in making coca and doing that sort of thing.
Okay, so this is why I asked this question. So if in terms of the farmland in Colombia, how much of the farmland is being used for coca and whatever else versus, I'm not even talking about like small farms. I'm talking about to get the banana or whatever things. Like, what is the distribution in terms of farmland?
I mean, it's hard to know. I don't have those that
Roughly
data on top of my head. But right now our major exports are cocaine and carbon and fossil fuels. So I mean, like that's the majority of what we're doing. That kind of connects us to how this crisis happened right now, which is that first, Duque, Uribe's protege, wins the presidency, and we start seeing people talk about the murders of social and environmental leaders. So he was elected in 2018, and 2019, 2020 happened, and every year it's like, 300, 400, 500, up to 1,000 social leaders are being murdered because they're protesting mining.
Are you kidding?
Yeah,
1,000 a year.
About close to 1,000. It was like 700 a year, something like that. And actually, we also don't know what the real numbers are. That's, again, I keep emphasizing that because it's hard to tell like official numbers versus people being disappeared and you don't know about this. And again, like Americans can go to Colombia and have a great time, but this is all happening to the most vulnerable people there. And nobody talks about it. A lot of indigenous people, nobody talks about it. And that's kind of really the tragedy here. So Duque starts talking about bringing fracking to Colombia, more mining. And so in 2009, he issues this tax reform to give huge tax cuts, very trickle-down economic style, to the mining companies, the coal companies, major Colombian and American multinational corporations. And these massive tax cuts, right, they tell the people, well, this is how our economy is going to grow, and this is how we're going to be able to compete in the global marketplace and whatever. So then COVID hits. We've had 2 years of people trying to get the international community's attention over international human rights violations, people being murdered, people being killed. People are protesting in New York, where I live, trying to protest for the UN, all of these things, right? Trying to bring attention. Anytime anybody protests, the Colombian state is like, oh, this is just Maduro engineering this whole thing, and this is just the legacy of Fidel Castro, right? They got that propaganda thing going. So this is happening. COVID hits, and about a month ago, the finance minister goes out and he says, well, we have about a month left of money left. The government is gonna run out of money in a month.
Surprise!
Surprise! Surprise! We're out. I'm sorry, we got no more money. And I mean, this is also considering the fact that one of the big problems in Colombia is corruption from political leaders who just take public funds and they steal it. I mean, they just take it and they, nepotism and all this sort of thing is going on. But yeah, these tax cuts happen, and then they use that as an excuse. And we know the story here in the United States. They say that we tax cuts created a deficit, and now we got no more money. So, this is one of the areas of research that I specialize in, macroeconomics and money politics. And I'm like, wow, that's really, what an interesting turn of events. So the Colombian government says, we're going to run out of money in a month. We have to institute a bunch of new sales tax on basic utilities, basic foods that hit the working class and the middle class at large. And the people just lose it because, one, they hadn't received very much of any pandemic relief. And we know just in our country how ludicrous and difficult it was to deal with that. So imagine in a country in the global south, going through all of these issues, people work their asses off, right? And they barely, like living paycheck to paycheck in a country in the global south, it just takes this incredible resilience. And people do it. People put their head down and they do it. And so they don't get much pandemic relief. They're working their ass off. They don't know whether to stay home or go out They're afraid of the public health crisis. You know, Colombia, I think, is the third country with the third Latin American country with the most deaths, something like that. So people are dying at very high rates. And then the government's like, oh, by the way, we ran out of money. Now we're going to tax you all, specifically the working class, so we can raise the money so we can function as a state. And, you know, they like interview this finance minister, and they're like, do you even know how much a dozen of eggs costs? And he gives a number that's like completely off, just like a ridiculous number.
This is like basic. I mean, in New York, we'll talk about this later, but this is like the epitome of the question that the reporter asks of the people in an economic crisis. This is George Bush, what's the cost of a milk carton? Yeah. So what does he say about the cost of eggs?
Well, I mean, in pesos, like, right, like he's like, oh, you know, it's like something like $2-3, and people are paying like, you know, $10 or something for it, and people are furious. So this kicks off we had seen protests and kind of national shutdowns, general strikes happening here and there over the last few years, but this kicks off this round, and people are more pissed off than they've ever been. I think more and more people are starting to realize the grave mistake that it has been giving these people power. People are realizing the incompetence that these people have at the head of power, and that now that they don't have their terrorist boogeyman, they've got nothing, which is one reason why Uribismo wants the FARC to stay in power, to stay armed, because they want a perpetual infinite war to keep on going. And they're not, you know, they demobilized.
So what happened on the ground last week when folks, I mean, they proposed this tax on workers, and then how did everybody respond? And then how did the government respond?
Well, they started to take the streets and protest, and you know, in Latin America, a lot of these protests are both, you know, it breaks your heart, but it's beautiful to see because of the energy, the spirit. It's very festive. People protest down there, you know, in a very communal, festive way, and it's quite a sight to see. So that was going on, and the government responded with just a lot of aggression, and over a period of time, they started to knock off the internet. And so, like in the city of Cali, they took out the internet. They began to censor Instagram and Facebook posts that had videos of police brutality, of military brutality and whatnot. Started disappearing people. There's been a lot of people disappeared. There's been deaths. There's been.
Can I ask you a detail about that? When you say, and we understand the historical context of disappearing people, but what types of people are disappearing? Like, we're talking about people who show up at protests. What is?
Right. So, like, let's, you know, as an analogy, if you're out here in the United States and you're at a Black Lives Matter protest, imagine. Well, they started to do it here. I mean, I know they did it in Portland. At least once it was on the news where they showed Trump was like, go find these people, and they put someone in a van. I remember watching that. That's the sort of thing we're talking about. So we don't know if people are being held like in custody without any kind of knowledge about it or things like that. This is quite common. I mean, when my dad grew up in the 80s in Colombia in college, he was part of student protests, and, you know, people would get disappeared. If like just the cops would get you and they'd put you in a car and you wouldn't hear from them again, or maybe you'd be released, maybe you wouldn't, you don't know. And so the people kind of escalated the protesting. And of course, you're hearing now things from the government about how they just want to, it's verbatim US talking points. They just want to loot. They don't want to work. They just want to destroy property. And this is just Venezuela trying to take over. Like, you know, all of a sudden Maduro is this genius who is like orchestrating everything around the world. It's not like they got their own very serious problems in Venezuela, but he's also orchestrating Colombia apparently now.
Fidel Castro's dead, guys. Let's just be real.
Yeah.
So when Fidel Castro dies, the mastermind gets infused into Maduro, and then when he's done, it's going to be AOC masterminding.
That's the next one. Listen, I get attacked on Twitter sometimes from people that are like, you know, AOC's Castro is in Colombia. Anybody that's not with the right wing is called a Castro Chavista, and so they'll call even like a neoliberal or a moderate if they criticize them, they'll be like, "Oh, you're a Castro Chavista. Everybody's a Castro Chavista."
If that's the case, just roll with it. That's my whole theory. Go for it. Go all the way.
Yeah. So that's been at the center of the tension. What's going on? They're taking out the internet. There's an incredible amount of police brutality happening right now, and the people are still in that struggle. I mean, I think what's important and exciting to see is that the progressive opposition last elections got second place, received the most number of votes a leftist has ever received in the history of Colombia. And he's running again, and he's way ahead in the polls this time. So his name is Gustavo Petro. And he's running as a progressive. He's running as a progressive that is about healing the country. He was part of the M19 kind of guerrilla movement, and they weren't like the FARC or anything like that. It was much different. And he renounced his arms later on in life. He was really young when that happened, and then he kind of took a different path. But he's running on like structural reforms, peace, healing in the country, trying to figure out how to move ahead, while at the same time making sure that power is distributed much differently in the country. And most importantly, he's running on a sustainable environmental project, which is one of the first ones we've seen from a Latin American that's like as overt.
It has to. It overlaps. When are the elections? Is there a sense?
Yeah, June next year.
June next year. And then in terms of last week, has the government responded? Has anybody responded to the violent response from the government in terms of very peaceful protests?
I mean, I think the Biden administration has started to like threaten them with pulling their our military support.
That was a Black Hawk helicopter, but was it from us recently, or was this like another era? Do we have any sense?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about that. Couldn't tell you about that. But I mean, Ayanna Pressley, AOC, and a number of other progressives here in the U.S. have denounced this, and at least in my lifetime, I've never seen something like this coming from U.S. Elected officials. In fact, John Kerry is still out there talking about how great Plan Colombia was. I mean, he literally said he's quoted as saying that he wants to approach Biden's environmental policy in the same way they did Plan Colombia. They're like he's on record saying that. So it's just a complete disconnect from like
no idea.
They have no idea. They have no idea. And it's just it's
no, they do. That's the problem. They do. They just don't know a strategy that works. They're caught. They're like stuck in, as Mitt Romney said, 1980s politics are calling. Or no, that was Obama calling Mitt Romney. 1980s politics are calling, but in the reverse order. Right. Oh my God, Andres, I want to talk about like there's a lot more we have to talk about, but can you come back on? Let's talk about New York City politics. Unfortunately, we have a panel, but I would love to talk about. It's just a crazy day in terms of news, but we'd love to talk about the mayor's race.
Absolutely. Last thing, just very quick,
please.
that I'd say is please follow this movement. It's called Colombia Humana, Humanist Colombia. That's kind of the movement around Gustavo Petro. He's organizing what he's calling a historic New Deal, very much around the narratives that we've had here about the Green New Deal. I brought him to. I was part of a team that brought him to the Progressive Congressional Strategy Summit here in the U.S. with a lot of our progressive elected officials and whatnot. So he's launching this. He's bringing in liberals. He's bringing in the left. He's bringing in progressives to do something to change Colombia's future. And there's worry that he can get assassinated or something like that. So the more that people in the international community are paying attention to this, the better it is for everybody.
Andrés Bernal, thank you. This was beautiful. Thank you so much for reaching out. Let's have you back on. We'll talk more about Colombia and anywhere else. And of course, New York City, because we've got a mayor's race heating up.
Heating up. It's getting good.
I don't know. You and I might disagree. I don't think it's getting good. I think it's getting.
People's cards are getting put on the table finally.
It's getting. I was in the Majority Report earlier. I lost it for all the progressives who supported. I mean, like, come on. We all knew Andrew Yang was. not that I don't think he's the front runner. I mean, you and I probably agree with us. Okay, another conversation. We'll talk about, we have a panel, we've talked about Palestine. This is more important.
Yeah.
All right.
All righty.
Thanks, Andres.
All righty.
Talk soon.
Bye-bye.
All right, we will be right back with our fabulous panel. Akela Lacy's here, and so is Joshua Kahn Russell. We're going to talk about what's happening with Israel and Palestine. Oh, man. Tough day, man. Very tough day. We'll be right back. Hello, welcome back to the Nomiki Show. Thank you to everybody. Today is a hearty day. Akela Lacy, thank you so much for joining us. She's a politics reporter at The Intercept. We love her. And Joshua Kahn Russell, we also love, is executive director at the Wildfire Project. Both friends of the show. This is a show I want to talk. Let's just start off. 2 topics today. The big topic is what's happening with Israel and Palestine. Almost too much to comprehend. But I also want to talk about we've had him on the show. Stephen Donziger has been targeted by Chevron, right? I don't know if you've been following this story, but he has been dealing with corporate persecution. He's been under house arrest for over, I think, almost 2 years at this point, if not more than 2 years. He was the attorney representing thousands of indigenous workers and people in Ecuador. And he won a case with others against Chevron, and Ecuador, their Supreme Court, their courts demanded that Chevron pay in damages. And somehow, because Chevron's very crafty, they were able to work our legal system and basically come up with insane charges. So he had a hearing yesterday. So I just want to start with that one, if we can. Dorsey, just start with Stephen, and then we'll go to Israel-Palestine, because I do want to react to his statement, because he's creating a global movement. Let's play this real quick.
This is much bigger than me. This is an effort by corporate America, particularly the fossil fuel industry, to impose a new playbook on how our court system works so they can attack and silence their critics, so they can continue their planet-destroying pollution practices that are really threatening the existence of everybody. So I'm just a symbol that they want to go after, so they can use it as a weapon of intimidation to try to stop this work from happening, to try to discourage and demoralize lawyers and campaigners and human rights advocates, environmental justice campaigners from even doing this work. It's extremely important people stand by me. Tomorrow we have a court date at 10 a.m. at the federal court in Manhattan. We're going to go in there and fight hard for the truth. Beforehand at 8:30, there's a rally just outside the court. Please get there. Roger Waters is going to be speaking, Marianne Williamson, Susan Sarandon, activists from Sunrise, from Extinction Rebellion and other organizations. It's going to, and plus some of my lawyers. And it's going to be a really important point for us to convey to the court and convey to Chevron that they cannot get away with this.
So that actually happened yesterday, the rally. You know, he frames this from a perspective of he's a symbol for the legal system. And I think, you know, many of us have been highlighting how the Trump legal system would change the world that we live in. And I mean, this didn't happen yesterday. It happened before, and who knows if it would happen under a neoliberal administration, but it's undeniable that it's happening. And for those of us who feel that the legal system should be just, there's an egregious corporate alignment in this case in terms of the justice who has been overseeing this and who she's appointed to investigate the case, who they're consultants for Chevron. So let's just make it very clear. Joshua, you work in the environmental space. I'm sure you're probably covering this, you know, looking at this closely. What are your thoughts on what's happening with Stephen? Because this is, you know.
Yeah, I mean, You mentioned, Nomi, that that we're going to be both talking about the Middle East and this case, and the thing they both have in common is that they're about indigenous sovereignty, and it's so following this case, I think demands of people understanding the role that Native people in Ecuador have been playing in standing up to not just the state, but to multinational oil companies, and in this case, Chevron in particular, which for nearly half a century has been poisoning indigenous communities. So it's just to take a step back in the bigger picture. They've been poisoning those communities in the rainforest they protect in Ecuador. They've destroyed their water. There's been epidemics of liver, stomach, and throat cancer. The ransacking of the most biodiverse place on Earth, the lungs of the Earth, creating conditions for childhood leukemia to spread. And so that, and I appreciate, one of the many things I appreciate about Donziger's work after spending many decades working on this case, which this response is because they won the case, right? The people of Ecuador won a case against Chevron. And so there's a $9.5 billion settlement that Chevron is like, we're not going to pay that. That was back in 2011, and they've been fighting it tooth and nail ever since. And so Chevron's strategy is both, they don't want to pay the settlement, but more than that, they don't want to set the precedence of people using the legal system to defend indigenous rights, and they can't let this stand. So it isn't about Donziger as individually, and it is about solidarity and them trying to break mechanisms through which we can have international solidarity. And this is such an intense week for that, as there's so much repression around the world. I think a lot of US progressives are beginning to understand why we need to have an internationalist orientation to our work, and also why, if you're an environmentalist or you care about climate change, you need to have indigenous sovereignty kind of front and center. And so to put a quick next step for folks who do want to plug in, because I know that the video clip that you played was, for folks, I think that was in New York, right?
Yeah, he's under house arrest. He's out of his home.
Yeah, so if you're not in New York, one place you can plug in is going to AmazonWatch.org. Amazon Watch has been one of the key US players in supporting this fight for self-determination from Ecuadorian Native people for decades now. And so they're a great group to check out if you want to get more information.
What's so crazy about this is the Ecuadorian courts sided with the people. And yet, here we are, US courts, corporate courts. Akela, I mean, you're on the political beat. How I don't even know how I ask this question, but how much of a mess is our court system at this point across the boards?
Well, I think this is a good example of, I guess a disproof of what, is sort of repeated a lot in legal circles, which is that, particularly in issues like this, which is that if you go through the appropriate channels, justice will be served eventually, which in this case might be true, but you see, immediately how quickly forces mobilize to upset, outcomes that they aren't happy with. My colleagues have been doing a lot of work covering corporate responses to indigenous protests over pipelines. And my colleague actually had a new piece out just the other day about how law enforcement and energy companies have been leading lobbying efforts against or to criminalize different forms of protest in the wake of this past summer and then the attacks on the Capitol. And so I think it's just important to keep all of these things in perspective and name the players who are taking steps to try to, either entrench their power or, legalize, cracking down on free speech in these cases.
What's so crazy to me is this is, in terms of market wise, it's a dying industry, and so many. I mean, I say dying. When is a bigger question, but there is oil and gas is they're shifting. They're shifting their strategies, and I asked Stephen of this. I was like, why are they doing this to you? It just seems so egregious. They lost by. They can pay that money easily. And yet they keep going and they keep pushing. And so not so much like why they're doing it, but is Biden going to do something knowing very well where the markets are going, how oil and gas is shifting their strategies? Either one of you can jump in. Like, I understand sometimes he stays on the sidelines about a lot of issues in this environment, but this is a really risky one. I've spent the last week interviewing political prisoners, so maybe I'm just feeling this a little bit in a deeper way, but like, not a great, he doesn't want to have this on his record with the rising left, no? As a rising left organizing around climate in particular. Whoever wants to jump in.
I don't want to like speculate about whether they're going to jump in or not. I think, I could say that based on his track record, like, we can assume that he probably won't, but like, I think it's taking a gamble on whether or not they think that this is something that his supporters would come back and, criticize him over, which at this point, I mean, I don't think that there's like necessarily, well, I mean, maybe it's fair to say that there's like a relative lack of attention to this particular issue among like, the leftist groups that are like the loudest agitators against Biden, particularly not that and I think it's ironic because as Joshua pointed out, there is a strong parallel between this situation and what we're going to talk about with respect to Palestine and Israel. But I don't think that the movements are making those connections at the same rate of amplification that organizers would hope necessarily. So I think that probably means that we're not going to hear much from the White House on this anytime soon. But yeah, I'm open to Joshua's thoughts. I hope they might be more optimistic.
Yeah, they're not, but it is why their strategy is to try to get this on the desk of Merrick Garland and to say that like all of the current infrastructures in the pocket of the oil companies, it needs to be taken up the chain, and so that's what they're trying to do.
Okay, let's shift gears. Benjamin Netanyahu made a statement about the airstrikes that were launched. Israel has, I think it's over 24 Palestinians have now been killed, targeting an apartment complex, among other places. Benjamin Netanyahu issued a statement. Let's play that clip.
We're at the height of a campaign. Since yesterday, the Israeli Defense Forces executed hundreds of attacks on Hamas and Islamic Jihad in Gaza. We targeted militant commanders. We hit many of their quality targets. At the conclusion of situational assessment, it was decided that both the might of the attacks and the frequency of the attacks will be increased. Hamas will be getting blows it didn't expect.
So, Benjamin Netanyahu, conservative, going through a lot of issues on his own in terms of corruption. Whether or not he survives is another question. But he's like doubling down. He's tripling down. He's quadrupling down. He's all in right now. And it's, I think it's odd because he's doing this at a time when he doesn't have the Trump administration to back him up. I personally believe this is a little bit of a risk for him politically. I will get to the existential issues on the ground, but I think it's a political risk for him because he doesn't have the Trump administration to back him up. Maybe Biden does nothing. Maybe Biden rides this out, but I don't actually think the Biden administration dynamics geopolitically, not because of Israel, because Israel's obviously in bed with the Democratic Party, or parts of the Democratic Party. But I think because Biden owes his support from communities that don't necessarily align with the Netanyahu administration. Does that make sense geopolitically? So, Mike, I don't understand geopolitically because you're thinking Netanyahu, what is he doing? Like his one benefactor is the United States. Why? Why are you doing this at this moment? Either one of you can jump in. Nope, nothing. Pregnant pause.
Well, there's so much. I mean, it's a play to try to shore up his coalition, right? So you escalate the displacement of Palestinians in East Jerusalem, in the Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, which is where all the attention is focused right now. repressing protests in order to provoke a response, right? And when that provocation wasn't enough, they attacked worshipers at Al-Aqsa Mosque to get the response they needed, which was Hamas responding with rockets, which injured 6 people. Then Israel, retaliated from what they provoked, killing 25 Palestinians, including 9 children. And it is just the typical playbook. It's that old play of you try to create a fervor and shore up a coalition and national unity around the sense of a threat. I agree that it's a risk, Nomi. We'll see how it plays out, but it doesn't seem that different than the pattern that this is like Ariel Sharon's playbook,
I mean, it's a risk, but it's a pattern. But at this moment, I mean, he doesn't have to build a coalition locally. No, I guess I'm not understanding. I feel like he needs to be playing the geopolitical game, not the local game of politics. I hate to break it down that way because it's such a dehumanizing way of looking at things. But unfortunately, that's how they're looking at things. And the reality is, as we know over and over and over, is there's a slaughter of people who are completely indefensible and don't have the power structure. We know. Akela, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think part of this is that Netanyahu can bet on what we've seen, aside from whatever Biden and the White House does, he can bet on a couple of things that will be true, which we've already seen, which is that media will uncritically parrot Israel's narrative about this, no matter where, no matter how much the progressive wing of the Democratic Party has shifted. Like, media is very, pretty behind on this one still, I think. We've seen I've seen just countless examples of it over just the past couple of days. And then you see some candidates in the Democratic Party who are still, who are using that leeway to continue sort of these, Carolyn Maloney and Andrew Yang, these statements, just, not criticizing one side or the other, but very clearly doing that for a purpose. And so I think he's not necessarily concerned about whether or not Biden's going to back him, because I don't even know really what the United States would do at this point. We're not at the point where we're talking, Elizabeth Warren, brought up adding conditions to aid to Israel at Day Street, but that was the most sort of attention that any U.S. Israel policy has gotten, since Biden took office, and that's not anywhere near the conversation that you need to be having to address this sort of thing. So I think he still has a lot of leeway, and he knows that. And quite frankly, I don't really think that he cares much about the human impact of these actions. Which
it's a problem with sending your leaders to Harvard, is that they understand U.S. politics a little bit more than most. Okay, so on that note, I'm so happy you brought that up, Akela, because the New York Times naturally edited a headline to erase the story of Palestinian families being evicted from their homes. Let's show that. Friend of the show, Micah Utrick, says this is a great account if you guys don't follow it, called Editing the Great Lady. The police enter the compound. You can read it right in front of us, right? This is a classic example of the media, and the New York Times is clearly the largest, but this is happening over and over. Simultaneously, you've had I want to profile my friend, Congressman Richie Torres, who is a rising star in the Democratic Party. And I nearly lost my cool today on the Majority Report about this, because I think it's super important. As you mentioned, Akela, there are leaders in the Democratic Party who will, even if Biden does not, there are other leaders who will back up this narrative because they've been on AIPAC trips where their hummus was paid for. They got to go meet with, they got to go to the Wailing Wall. They got to stay in a fancy little hotel. And next thing you know, their policies have changed because of a trip and some donations. So I want to say this clearly, because I don't think people understand how many supposedly progressives side with AIPAC. When I say progressives, I mean progressives who have supported, Richie Torres endorsed Bernie Sanders. Let's be incredibly clear. Richie Torres endorsed Bernie Sanders. There are others in New York who've endorsed Bernie Sanders, who have supported this messaging, or are supporting mayoral candidates who support this messaging. So this is a which side are you on kind of moment, I think. And not only has he done this, he's also on the side of statehood for Puerto Rico. So there's like a little similar situation in terms of colonialism there. But this is deeply problematic. You have AIPAC, which has done a lot of incubation of the next generation of politicians. Cory Booker, of course, was part of that community. Kamala Harris, there are many. But I'm really curious politically how people like Richie Torres, who's younger than I am by 3 or 4 years, so maybe he's like 34 or so, younger politicians getting elected have been, sometimes recruited at the state level, at the city council level, at the congressional level to go and support these narratives. It's kind of been their pipeline from the start. But how do they do that in conjunction with this left? Like, how does Richie Torres in 10 years justify this position? How does he stay in office? How do any of these lawmakers, Ruben Gallego, I mean, there's a laundry list of these lawmakers who are echoing these talking points. How do they do it in this environment? And how does that sustain the power structure in Israel when we know very well the Carol Maloney's and the Nancy Pelosi's are just older and it doesn't work anymore? Okay, let's go to you first.
Well, I think a lot of whether people like Richie Torres or Gallego on these certain points survive depends on how well people on the left and groups that are active on these issues can unite the narratives that justice in Palestine is inextricably tied to justice in the United States, and get progressives united behind that messaging to a point where politicians can't just say, oh, well, that's a foreign policy issue, we're not talking about that right now. And that takes a lot. That takes solidarity in media, that takes solidarity in these organizations. And I think we're definitely moving towards that point, but I think it's still obviously a long way off.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it'll depend on how well we can get organized, because Nomi, what you just described also is how well the other side is organized. And, I mean, like so many other young Jews, my heart hurt so much, especially seeing like the dancing and cheering of Jerusalem Day Israelis celebrating violence against Palestinians. And, my blood was just boiling at what was being justified in our name. And for my entire lifetime, advocates of the political project of Israeli colonialism have conflated a Jewish identity with an ethnic nationalism, which is given cover to an ethnic cleansing effort, right? Which, by the way, here in the US is primarily funded and propped up by far-right evangelical Christians, which is why their side has so much infrastructure and is so well organized, because that's where so much of the money is coming from. And so what Akela points to is how our side needs to get organized. And so, if you're an American Jew, you can play a role in shifting this justification. And so one way to do that I want to offer folks is if you go to ifnotnowmovement.org, there's an open call tomorrow, a conference call to plug into pressure campaigns that are here in the US. And you can organize with other young Jews who are transforming, not just transforming this narrative, but getting a lot clearer in the kinds of pressure campaigns that we have, because, it's unclear where, I don't know if y'all saw Ned Price, the State Department spokesperson, get caught totally flat-footed and giving no clear answer. Now is the time to push the Biden administration. And the best, if you are young, progressive, and period, but I'm as a Jewish person making appeal to Jews because I think we have a different kind of voice in the discourse, right? Because our identity's been weaponized. That now is a great time to plug in to get educated about what's going on. And the best way to do that is through organizing. It's great to make statements on social media, all of that, but really plug in to a group. And If Not Now is a great way. You can plug in no matter where you live in the country, et cetera. And what
does that refer to? What does If Not Now refer to?
Oh my gosh, I actually, it is. You're catching me off guard.
Go to the website. I'm not going to.
Yeah.
I mean, it refers to a phrase in it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And if you can't go to If Not Now, or if you can simultaneously drag these mother effers who are under the age of 45 who think it's okay to go to APAC conferences and echo these points. And I'm sorry, I'm disgusted. I've known some of these people for many, many years. And the fact that they can run around and say that they're pro LGBTQ and pro this and pro that, and then simultaneously be pro colonialism, pro APAC. It's not even like APAC is right wing at this point. Has always been, but I'm all about like drag them. They feel it. I know. I've seen them react in their comments. They feel it, and they need to feel it because the generation is shifting. These aren't people who are dying out in 5 years are going to be retiring and cashing out and getting into their 7th home. These are people who want to be, their entire careers are contingent on the resources that are being given to them. But the power structures are shifting. And it's up to the organizing that you're talking about, Joshua and Akela, that are going to determine their futures. And if they don't feel it, then primary their asses, in my opinion. Just throwing that out there. I love you guys. Deep day. Akela Lacy, Joshua Kahn Russell. Joshua, it's been a while. I miss you.
I know we missed a week. I'm glad to be.
A solid month since I think 2 weeks, 3 weeks. I don't know. It's been a while. Love you all. I'm going to do some shout outs. Ian Kinsel says, oh, this is funny. Your proposal in the majority report that we castrate men is unironically preferable to anything I've heard from New York City mayoral candidates. You have my vote. I'm not running for mayor, but I do feel that if anybody's ever had a dog before, I don't know if I've ever said this on air. I say it a lot. If anybody's have a dog, I have a boy dog. And when I first got him as a puppy, for a while, he had a little bit of an issue. He had 2 surgeries. He would just run around and pee on things and rip things to shred and hump things. I don't know if I can say that on YouTube. And he was just a mess. And then he got fixed. And then when he got fixed, he was the most amazing dog ever. And I'm not trying to compare men to dogs, but I am comparing animals. We're all animals, right? So maybe men wouldn't be wreaking havoc and trying to one-up each other and throwing bombs on other countries and trying to occupy each other. If that thing alone, I'm not saying that women aren't problematic, but I'm just going to say it would be a little bit less problematic, just a little bit. I'm running for mayor on that. So there you go. Prairie Fire Kowalski says, who is the yin to the yang of the New York City mayor's race? I would say Diane Morales is probably the alternative to Andrew Yang, but it's a weird race. Catherine Garcia was just endorsed by the New York Times. She was the head of the sanitation workers. So she has some like real life experience in terms of management and government. And that was the New York Times argument. But I also think that was sort of like a wink, wink, nod, nod endorsement of Eric Adams, which they didn't want to do because they were like, oh, management is so important. And then they were like, by the way, no one else really has management experience except for Eric Adams and Scott Stringer. And Scott Stringer is going down, 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 down. All right. Yeah. So shout out to everybody in the chats. You guys are doing great work. Huge thank you to all of our moderators on YouTube and Twitch for building those algorithms and keeping the spaces troll free. We love you, Harvey K. Hope your trip to New York was great. Talk soon, and we'll see you tomorrow, 3 p.m. Eastern, right here on YouTube and Twitch. And for those of you who are not already subscribers, please, please, please subscribe, like, share. Join us on Mondays. Check out Arun Chowdhury's new show called, you know what it is? It's called The Committee Program. It's on Mondays from 3 to 6 p.m., but we post it all throughout the week. Craven James just sent some love and says, it's a man, dogs are smarter. Depends on the dog. Depends on the man. Just leaving it there. All right, guys, we will see you tomorrow. Join us at patreon.com/The Nomiki Show. Please join us there. That is how we sustain the show. Go over, check us out, and we will see you tomorrow. Stay in solidarity. Take care.
The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. Yeah, clash momentarily for class solidarity. Cash circulating, give the masses back its currency. Greed from elites, oligarchs stay fed. Deep state, fake fed, everybody break bread. Racism, homophobia, sexism, religion in this melting pot we live in. Time to build a new system, unionize labor rights. Highlight the issue, talking heads left is best. The saga continues. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show. The Nomiki Show.